The story begins in darkness. In the dead of night, when the moon hung low and heavy, there were whispers. Whispers of a woman so beautiful, so powerful. Her name was feared across lands that stretched from the frozen north to the sun-baked deserts of the east. She was known by many names, but the one that lived in legend, the one that lived in the nightmares of all who dared speak it, was the Witch Queen. The name itself was cursed. It slipped from tongues in hushed tones, as though uttering it aloud might summon her wrath. In a time long forgotten, when kingdoms rose and crumbled like sand castles before the tide, there lived a queen who had conquered more than just lands. She had conquered death itself. The Witch Queen ruled not with an iron fist, but with a terrible promise. A promise to those who crossed her path. A promise that she would remain young, eternally young, so long as the blood of virgins stained her skin, and their innocence fed her undying power. No one knew where she came from. Some said she was born of a forgotten god. Others that she had made a pact with something far older, far darker. What is known, however, is that her reign of terror stretched for centuries. Today, we dive deep into the twisted rituals that ensured her immortality. Today, we reveal the horrific truth behind the blood of virgins. A ritual so macabre, so vile, that the very thought of it makes the heart race and the mind shudder. But let us begin with her origins, the place where it all began. In the year 1415, the kingdom of Althea stood proud, nestled in the valley between two towering mountain ranges. It was a kingdom of prosperity. Its king, Michael III, was beloved by his people, and his queen, Althea, was revered as the epitome of grace. Together, they ruled with a sense of harmony, and their reign was marked by peace and plenty. But peace, as history has shown, is often fragile. The delicate balance between life and death, light and shadow, is easily shattered. It was a cold winter when the change came. The first sign was subtle, a sickly sweet scent that seemed to permeate the air. At first, it was nothing more than a passing thought, a trick of the mind. But then came the strange deaths. At first, a merchant in the marketplace, then a soldier on patrol. Each death was inexplicable, with no signs of violence, no wounds, no traces of disease. The bodies would simply be found, pale and still, as though life had been drained from them. King Michael called upon his advisors, his trusted men of science, but no one could explain the deaths. It was the court sorcerer, a man known only as Elias, who first whispered of dark forces at play. He spoke of an ancient curse, a curse so old that it had been forgotten by most, save for a few secretive, shadowed corners of the world. Elias had warned of a woman, a powerful sorceress, who had once walked the lands of Rtha long ago. He spoke of Lysandra, a name that had been erased from history books, a name that had been purged from memory. Yet Elias knew it was no coincidence. Lysandra had been an immortal witch, a woman who had defied death and time itself. She had vanished for decades, but Elias' eyes gleamed with a chilling certainty. He said she had returned. The queen, Althea, laughed when she first heard the news. Immortality, she thought, was nothing more than the ramblings of a madman. But that laughter would soon die on her lips, for she was the next victim. One by one, the women of the court began to fall ill, their youth draining from their bodies. Their hair turned white, their skin sagged, and their once vibrant eyes dimmed. It was as though they were aging by decades in mere days. Althea, desperate, sought out Elias for answers. The sorcerer led her to a hidden chamber deep within the castle, a chamber that had been sealed for centuries. Inside, an ancient tome lay open, its pages brittle and yellowed with age. The ritual was detailed there, written in the blood of those who had died before. It was a ritual that promised eternal youth, but at a price that would not be paid in gold or silver, but in innocence. The ritual required the blood of virgins, young girls untouched by the world, their purity the key to unlocking the magic of eternal life, and the one who bathed in that blood would be granted immortality forever. The witch queen Lysandra had performed this ritual long ago, and her body had remained untouched by time. But there was more to it. The blood didn't just preserve her youth, it fed her power, her influence, and her control over the land. And once the ritual had begun, there was no turning back. Althea's eyes widened as the realization dawned on her. The horrors that had befallen her court, the sudden death of her people, they were not the result of some mysterious plague. They were sacrifices, blood offerings, and she, too, was on the verge of becoming a part of it. But the ritual was not meant for her. It had been meant for Lysandra, the one who would rise from the ashes, the one who would claim the throne. Althea made a choice, one that would condemn her soul to darkness. She, too, would bathe in the blood. She would claim immortality, even if it meant sacrificing her humanity. And so, Althea became the Witch Queen. Her beauty was renewed, her skin soft and unblemished, her hair shone like gold, and her eyes burned with an insatiable hunger. She had conquered time, she had conquered death, but the price would be steep. The rituals continued, the blood continued to flow, and with each passing year, Althea's hunger grew. She could feel the pull, the need for more, but the world would not provide her what she craved forever. And so, she set her sights on the next kingdom, the next unsuspecting victim. But no one could have known just how far she would go to maintain her power, how much blood it would take to truly make her immortal. The kingdom of Althea had no idea what it had unleashed. The whispers of the Witch Queen, once confined to old legends, now began to spread like wildfire across the land. No longer just a shadow of history, she was a living, breathing nightmare. Althea, now fully transformed into Lysandra, as dark hair was no longer the soft-spoken queen who had once ruled with grace. She was an entity of hunger, a predator who needed no throne to command. Her power was drawn not from the people, but from the very life force of those she chose to consume. Her first act as the Witch Queen was to order the construction of a secret chamber beneath the castle, a place where she could perform the most sacred of rituals, untouched by the eyes of her court. There, beneath the earth and stone, she began her work anew. Her court was soon filled with whispers of young girls vanishing in the night, the most beautiful, the most pure, the ones whose innocence was untainted, but they were never seen again. Their blood became the lifeblood of her immortality, keeping her ageless, her power ever growing. It was a feast that never ended. But such a dark force could not remain hidden forever. As the kingdom of Althea began to tremble under the weight of its queen's insatiable desire, a group of rebels rose up. They had heard the rumors, the strange disappearances, the growing dread, and they knew what they had to do. Led by a brave knight named Sebastian, they set out to uncover the truth. They would confront the Witch Queen and free the land from her grip of terror. Sebastian had once been a loyal soldier in Michael's army. He had seen the Queen's descent into madness with his own eyes. The once vibrant woman he had sworn to protect was now a creature of nightmare, her beauty fading with each passing day, only to be renewed by the blood of the innocent. His heart burned with a need for vengeance for his fallen comrades, for the innocent girls who had been slaughtered in the name of immortality, but most of all, for the betrayal of his king, Michael, who had failed to see the darkness that had crept into his own castle. The rebels moved in secret, gathering evidence, speaking with the few survivors who had escaped the Queen's rituals. What they learned was worse than they could have imagined. The Witch Queen had not only sought eternal life for herself, she had made a pact with an ancient, forgotten god, a being whose power transcended time itself. Through her blood rituals, Althea had unlocked the very gates of darkness, allowing this god to creep ever closer to the world of the living. The god, known as Vargan, demanded sacrifice. The blood of virgins was but a small price to pay for the power that flowed through her veins, and it was Vargan who whispered in her ear, guiding her, pushing her to seek more, to take more, until she could no longer see the line between humanity and monstrosity. The ritual had not been completed. It was only a beginning. The rebels knew they had to stop her, but the closer they came to the truth, the more the Witch Queen's influence seeped into the land. Shadows twisted beneath their feet. The ground grew colder, the air heavier, as if the land itself was suffocating under her power. Sebastian's heart ached as he witnessed the toll of the Queen's rituals. The once lush fields of Althea had become barren, as though drained of life. The people walked with hollow eyes, their spirits crushed under the weight of her reign. They had seen too much, heard too much, and had begun to lose hope. No one dared speak of the Witch Queen in public. And yet, in the dead of night, the doors of the castle would open to reveal those who had been chosen, those poor souls whose fate had been sealed by a queen who could never die. But as the rebellion advanced, a twist of fate intervened. One night, as Sebastian and his band of rebels crept into the castle, ready to confront the Witch Queen once and for all, they discovered something unexpected. A hidden journal written by Althea herself that chronicled her descent into madness. In its pages, she detailed the exact nature of the pact she had made with Vargan. She revealed that her immortality came at a cost far greater than anyone could imagine. The god, Vargan, was not just an entity of power, he was the source of her immortality. And as long as she continued the ritual, as long as she bathed in the blood of virgins, the bond between them would grow stronger, allowing Vargan to enter the world and claim it as his own. Althea's soul was no longer her own. She was a puppet, dancing on the strings of an ancient, malevolent force. And in the end, it was not just the queen who would pay the price. It was the entire world. The rebels, now understanding the true extent of the horror they faced, made one final attempt to confront the Witch Queen. But as they entered the sacred chamber beneath the castle, they found not a queen, but a monstrous, twisted version of the woman they had once known. Her beauty had been replaced with something far darker, her skin pale as death, her eyes blackened with an otherworldly fire. The Witch Queen stood in the center of the chamber, a pool of blood at her feet. She turned to face them, her lips curled into a smile of cold, twisted delight. "You think you can stop me?" she whispered. "You think you can end what has already begun?" And with that, she raised her arms, and the chamber was filled with a deafening roar. The ground trembled as if the very earth itself was being torn asunder. The walls bled, the air grew thick with the stench of death, and the shadows of long-dead souls reached out to claim the living. Sebastian's heart raced as he realized the truth. The Witch Queen had become something far beyond mortal understanding. She was no longer just a woman. She was a vessel for something darker, something that would destroy everything in its path. As the rebels stood frozen, watching the Witch Queen in her monstrous fall, the full weight of the horror that had been unleashed began to sink in. The chamber pulsed with an unnatural energy, and the walls themselves seemed to shudder, as if they were alive. The blood beneath her feet was no longer just a symbol of her immortality, it was a portal, a gateway to the abyss, and it was beginning to suck the life out of everything in its reach. Sebastian's breath quickened as he drew his sword, but the air itself seemed to resist him. His limbs felt heavy, as though a weight he could not see was pressing down on him, pulling him closer to the ground. Around him, the other rebels struggled to move, their faces twisted in terror. But it was not the queen herself that haunted their minds. It was what stood behind her. In the shadows, deep within the pool of blood, A presence loomed, a dark figure, barely visible but unmistakable in its terrifying power. Vargan, the god she had made her pact with, was waiting for the ritual to reach its climax, waiting to spill forth from the abyss and walk among mortals. The Witch Queen's eyes glinted with madness. She stepped forward, the blood beneath her swirling and rising, as though it had a life of its own. She no longer resembled the woman she had once been. There was no trace of Althea in her, only the twisted, unholy figure of Lysandra, the dark sorceress who had forsaken her humanity for eternal life. "You cannot win," she murmured, her voice a strange echo, as though multiple voices spoke at once. "You cannot stop what has already been set in motion. Vargan will walk this world, and there will be nothing left of it but shadows." Sebastian's sword trembled in his hand, but there was a fire in his chest, a final ember of defiance. The woman before him was no longer his queen. She was a thing beyond death, beyond reason. But that didn't mean she was invincible. There was still hope, a flicker of light in the endless darkness. "Not if I can help it," Sebastian whispered, gripping his sword with renewed strength. His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried with it the weight of his defiance. It was a challenge to fate itself. And in that moment, the battle began. The rebels charged, but the Witch Queen was swift. She moved like a shadow, her form flickering and vanishing before their eyes. One by one, they were thrown aside, their bodies slammed into the stone walls, unable to stand against her power. Sebastian alone pressed on, pushing through the suffocating atmosphere, his heart beating wildly in his chest. His eyes never left the Witch Queen's, those burning eyes, filled with a mixture of hatred, grief, and hunger. For a moment, they locked, and in that fleeting second, something shifted. He saw it, the remnants of Althea, buried deep inside her. The woman who had once been a queen, who had once loved her people, who had once been human. But that was not enough. That spark of humanity would not save her. With a roar, Sebastian leaped forward, his sword raised high. The Witch Queen reached out a hand, and the shadows around her surged. But it was too late. The sword plunged into her chest, and for a moment, the room went still. The blood that had once flowed like a river now erupted from her body, a crimson torrent that splashed against the walls, painting everything in its path. The Queen let out a sound, a horrific screech, as the power that had kept her alive for centuries began to slip from her grasp. Her body convulsed, her form flickering and warping, as if it were made of smoke and shadow. But the ritual was not over. The blood continued to pulse, the dark presence of Vargan growing stronger, thrumming with an unnatural rhythm. The ground beneath them cracked open, and a swirling vortex of black mist began to form, pulling at everything around it. Sebastian's heart sank as he realized the truth. The Witch Queen's death was only the beginning of something far worse. From the depths of the blood, a hand emerged skeletal, with fingers that reached out as if they were claws. The hand was followed by an arm, then a body, and finally a face horrible, twisted, and ancient, with eyes that glowed like burning embers. It was Vargan. He emerged fully, standing in the center of the chamber, a being of pure darkness. His form was almost impossible to comprehend, as though he was both here and not here at the same time. He was a being beyond death, beyond life, and he hungered. The hunger in his eyes was not for flesh, but for souls. The Witch Queen, her body now lifeless on the floor, was not the only one who had been consumed by this pact. It had taken all of them, the rebels, the kingdom, and now it was taking the world itself. Vargan raised his arms, and the very air trembled. The blood in the pool surged, lapping at his feet like a tide of darkness. His voice was not a sound but a feeling, a vibration in the core of the soul. "Your queen is dead," he said, his voice like the grinding of stones. "But I am eternal. I will always be here. Your world is mine now, and it will be swallowed by the shadows, just as it was meant to be." Sebastian felt his strength drain away. The world around him grew dim, the shadows thickening like a cloak. He could hear the screams of his fallen comrades echoing in his ears, their voices merging with the darkness. The rebels had failed. The world had lost. But deep within him, there was still a spark, a flicker of defiance, a final thought. Even in the face of darkness, there was a possibility, a chance, a way to undo what had been done. He just had to find it. Sebastian's mind raced. The darkness pressed in on him, suffocating him, and yet a single thought remained clear. Vargan, this god of destruction, this force of primal evil, was not invincible. There had to be a way. He had seen it in the journal. The Witch Queen, Althea, had written about the pact she had made. She had written about the ritual that kept her immortal, and perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way to sever it. But in that moment, it felt hopeless. The shadows swirled around him, closing in, and the very ground seemed to pulsate with a sickening, dark rhythm. The rebels were gone. His comrades lay broken and lifeless at his feet, their bodies drenched in the blood of virgins that had fueled the Witch Queen's dark reign. Vargon's form loomed larger, his presence suffocating the air. His gaze, burning and eternal, bore down upon Sebastian. "You think you can stop me?" Vargon's voice rumbled, a chorus of 1,000 voices echoing in the depths of the abyss. "I am the beginning and the end. I was before your world existed, and I will be when it has fallen into oblivion." Sebastian could barely stand against the crushing weight of the god's presence. His knees buckled, but somehow he managed to hold himself up. His sword, his only weapon, felt light in his hand, almost insignificant against the force of the god before him. And then, something within him snapped. A memory, a faint whisper from the journal. The ritual had not been invincible. The pact, though seemingly eternal, had a flaw. It had always had a flaw. For every cycle of bloodshed, every virgin offered to the abyss, the magic required a balance that the Witch Queen had failed to understand. There was one final, irreversible act that could break the cycle of immortality. The key, it seemed, lay in the blood itself. Without thinking, Sebastian threw himself toward the pool of blood at the center of the chamber. The blood was now thicker than before, its surface shimmering with unnatural light. It was no longer a simple offering, it was a conduit, a bridge, a gate. Vargan roared, the sound echoing through the chamber like the crashing of thunder. But Sebastian ignored him. The god's gaze locked on him with fury. But there was something else there, too, something like fear. Sebastian didn't have time to question it. He plunged his sword into the pool of blood, feeling its coldness seep up his arm. The moment the blade made contact with the crimson liquid, a jolt of energy shot through his body, sending him staggering back. The world spun around him, and he could hear the distant, mournful wail of the fallen rebels, their souls trapped in the blood, forever feeding the cursed ritual. But then he saw the shift. The ritual was unraveling. The magic that had bound the Witch Queen to the god's will was weakening. The blood swirled, its power fluctuating, and the shadows around him seemed to waver. It was working. He was pulling the thread that had tied the two together. "You think you can undo what is eternal?" Vargon's voice now trembled, no longer filled with the arrogance it had once held. His form flickered, as though the very fabric of his being was being torn apart. Sebastian gritted his teeth, pushing through the excruciating pain. His body felt as if it were being torn in two, but he held on. There was no turning back. The god would not be allowed to walk the earth, not if he had anything to say about it. And then, with a final, desperate cry, Sebastian thrust his sword deep into the pool of blood. The blood began to bubble and churn violently, the ground shaking beneath his feet as Vargan screamed in fury, his form flickering erratically like a dying flame. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Sebastian's vision blurred, and he could feel the last vestiges of his strength draining from him. But then came a deafening, final crack, the sound of reality itself breaking. Vargan's scream echoed through the chamber, and then silence. The blood, once so thick with the power of the curse, now lay still. The blood of virgins, the lifeblood of the Witch Queen's dark immortality, had been severed. The god's presence began to fade, his form dissipating into nothingness like smoke in the wind. The shadows that had consumed the land receded, their grip loosening with every passing second. Sebastian fell to his knees, exhausted, his sword falling from his hand. The chamber, once filled with dark power, was now eerily silent, save for the distant sound of the wind howling through the broken walls of the castle. It was over. The Witch Queen was dead. The god was banished. But there was a cost, a price too high for anyone to fully comprehend. Sebastian's breath came in ragged gasps. He had saved the kingdom, but at what cost? The blood of countless innocent girls had been spilled, and the land had been marked by the terrible legacy of the Witch Queen. Even now, as the castle crumbled around him, he could hear the faint echo of her voice, whispering in the dark, calling out from the depths of the blood-soaked earth. The darkness was gone for now, but the memory of the Witch Queen's reign would linger, haunting the land for generations to come. And in the end, what had been gained? Eternal youth, immortality, a life without end. Or was it all just a hollow promise? Sebastian's body trembled, the weight of the world finally pressing down upon him. His muscles were sore from the effort, but it was not his body that ached most. It was his heart heavy with the knowledge of what had been lost, the lives of the virgins, the souls of his comrades. The kingdom of Rtha itself, all of it, had paid a price for the Witch Queen's twisted pursuit of immortality. As the last remnants of the blood, now dark and murky, began to fade into the earth, a cold wind swept through the chamber. The oppressive atmosphere that had once hung thick and suffocating around them had lifted, but it left something else behind, a deep, aching silence. The castle, broken and cursed, seemed to groan as its ancient stones cracked, and as the air began to clear, Sebastian knew there was no going back. The Witch Queen was dead, but the consequences of her rituals were now woven into the very fabric of the land. He had destroyed the gateway, severed the bond that had kept her alive for so long, but at the cost of his own humanity. The rebels' bodies lay scattered across the chamber. They had given their lives for the cause, for the hope of a better world. But what kind of world had they saved? What was left to reclaim? The blood-soaked earth around him seemed to pulse with an eerie life of its own, as if the land had become a permanent scar, unable to heal. And Sebastian realized with a sickening clarity that there was no victory here. The land would never truly be free from the horrors that had plagued it. The Witch Queen's curse had seeped into the very bones of the earth. No amount of bloodshed could ever wash it away. As he stumbled from the ruins of the castle, the ground beneath him trembled once more. The ruins of Rtha, the once beautiful kingdom, stood as a shadow of what it had been. The crops had withered, the townsfolk had long since fled, and the very air felt heavy, as though the weight of centuries had pressed down on it. And yet, something still stirred within the broken halls of the castle. A faint whisper in the wind, a soft, barely audible voice that seemed to echo from the very stones. "Did you truly think it was over?" The voice whispered, filled with an eerie calm. Sebastian froze. The air grew colder still. A sense of dread filled him, as though the earth itself was rejecting his presence. And then he saw it a flicker, the shadow that moved just out of the corner of his eye. His heart began to race as he turned, searching the empty chamber. And there, standing at the center of the blood-soaked floor, was a figure of a woman, dressed in tattered robes. Her hair was long, dark, and matted with dried blood. Her eyes were vacant, hollow, as though they had seen beyond the realms of the living. It was her, the witch queen Althea, but no longer was she the vibrant, powerful queen who had bathed in the blood of virgins. She had become something else, something other. Her once beautiful features were now twisted and decayed, her skin pale and stretched tight against her skull. She was a walking corpse, a broken vessel of the immortality she had once sought so desperately. "You think you've ended it?" Althea's voice rasped, barely more than a whisper. "You think the blood of virgins, the blood of my soul, has been severed? But you are wrong, Sebastian." Her smile was ghastly, filled with a terrible, unnatural glee. Her hollow eyes fixed on him, and the ground around her trembled with dark energy. The blood beneath her feet began to bubble and writhe once again, the same dreadful rhythm returning. "You've only stopped the cycle, Sebastian, not the cause." His breath caught in his throat. Was she alive, or was this something far darker? Something that could never truly die? "You think that by killing me, by ending the god's presence, you've freed this land. But no one can undo the past. No one can escape the curse I have brought upon this world," she continued, her voice growing more and more distant, as though speaking from another plane entirely. The blood that had once poured from the virgins now seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of its own. It was no longer just a symbol of her immortality. It had become something new, something that defied reason. It wasn't just a conduit to Vargan anymore. It was a marker, a scar on the land that could never be erased. Sebastian stumbled backward, his sword still clenched tightly in his hand. Was there truly no end to this curse? Had all their sacrifice been in vain? The land, the people, the lives lost, it all seemed pointless now, swallowed by an endless cycle of darkness. "I may have died, Sebastian," Althea whispered, her voice growing fainter, "but the blood, the curse, the ritual, it lives in the land. It lives in you, in all of you, and it will never let go. Not until the last drop of blood has been spilled." And with that, she faded, her form disintegrating into the wind, leaving behind only the echo of her voice. The chamber fell silent once again, the faint rumble of the earth the only sound. Sebastian stood alone amidst the ruins, the weight of his failure pressing down on him. Had he truly defeated the Witch Queen, or had he only delayed the inevitable? Was the curse of immortality, the hunger for power, something that could ever be eradicated? Or was it destined to repeat itself forever? The truth, it seemed, was far more complicated than any simple victory. Sebastian's knees buckled, and he sank to the ground, his sword slipping from his hand. The land would never be the same, and perhaps it never would be. The Witch Queen's blood, her curse, had left a stain that could never be washed away, no matter how hard one fought to remove it. As the night grew darker and the wind howled through the broken walls of Althea, one final question lingered in the air. What does it truly mean to be free from immortality? To live in a world where the past cannot be undone? The answer, like the curse itself, would never be clear. Only shadows remained. Time passed, but the land of Althea did not heal. Days bled into weeks, and weeks stretched into months. The scars of the Witch Queen's reign were not so easily erased. The wind carried with it whispers, warnings, and the people who dared to return to the kingdom found it unrecognizable. What had once been a place of lush fields, vibrant marketplaces, and a thriving community had become a desolate wasteland. The crops refused to grow. The rivers ran thick and stagnant. The trees that had once lined the roads were twisted and gnarled, their branches clawing at the sky like broken hands. Sebastian, though physically alive, could not escape the weight of the past. The land had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many others. He had believed that by striking down the witch queen and banishing the god, the curse would finally be broken. But as the days wore on, he began to question everything. The rebellion was over. The last of the rebels had died. Their blood spilled on the cold stone floor of the castle. And yet, despite the fall of Althea, the witch queen, and the banishment of Vargan, something remained. A presence. A coldness that lingered in the air like a shadow, watching, waiting, as though the curse, now embedded in the very earth, was still active. Sebastian wandered through the ruins of the castle, now a haunted shell. Its once great hall stood empty, the silence thick and oppressive. The echo of his footsteps was the only sound, and even that felt wrong, as if the stones themselves resented his presence. He had come here, seeking answers, but each day felt like a battle against the dark forces that continued to haunt the land. It wasn't until one fateful evening, long after the sun had set, leaving the world drowned in a cloak of darkness, that Sebastian encountered something he could not explain. As he walked the corridors of the castle, a strange light flickered in the distance. At first, he thought it was nothing more than his imagination, a trick of the shadows, but as he drew closer, the light became clearer, more defined. It was a soft, eerie glow that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He entered the chamber where the ritual had once been performed, the chamber where Althea had bathed in the blood, where the darkness had taken root. And there, standing at the center of the room, was a figure, a woman. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back, and her eyes, though dark and hollow, were unmistakable. They were the same eyes that had once been Althea's. But this woman was not the witch queen. No, she was something different. Her form flickered in and out of focus, as though she were not fully here, as if she were a ghost. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her lips were twisted into a faint smile that sent a chill down Sebastian's spine. "You think I am gone?" The woman's voice echoed through the chamber, soft but unmistakable. "You think you have freed this land from the curse I have laid upon it?" Sebastian's heart raced as he stared at her. "Who are you?" he whispered. "What are you?" "I am Althea's blood," the woman replied. "Her soul, her curse." The words cut through him like a knife. This was no ordinary apparition, no ghost. This was something far worse. The blood, the very blood that had sustained Althea's immortality, had not been destroyed. It had not been severed, as Sebastian had thought. It had lived on, feeding of the land, the air, the very bones of Rtha. It had fused with the earth, and now it had taken on a form of its own. Sebastian staggered back, feeling the weight of the truth descend upon him like an avalanche. The curse had not ended. It had merely transformed. Althea's soul, her essence, lived on, twisted by the very blood that had given her life. She had become a part of the land itself, a spectre bound to the place she had ruled. And now she was calling to him. "You sought to destroy me," she continued, her voice growing more insistent. "But you cannot destroy what has already become one with this world. You cannot destroy the blood that runs through these very veins." Sebastian's mind raced. He had made a terrible mistake. He had thought the battle was won, but it had only been shifted. The Witch Queen's curse had not been ended. It had merely adapted, spreading deeper into the land like poison through a wound. The land itself had become a vessel for her power, and now the very essence of Althea's immortality had turned into something new, something far darker, and it was no longer bound by the constraints of the ritual. A chill swept through the room, and the blood on the floor began to stir. It seemed to come alive, shifting and moving in unnatural patterns. The very walls of the castle groaned as if they were alive, as if the stones themselves were breathing. Sebastian could feel it, the pull, the temptation. The land wanted him to stay. It wanted to consume him, just as it had consumed Althea. He had made his choice when he defeated her. He had chosen to sacrifice his own humanity to stop the Witch Queen. But now, he realized, it was too late. The curse had claimed him too. The woman Althea's cursed essence stepped closer, her ghostly form flickering with every step she took. Her hollow eyes locked onto his. "You cannot leave, Sebastian," she whispered, her voice an echo of something ancient and malignant. "You have already given your soul to the land. You are a part of me now, and you will never escape." With that, the blood surged, rising like a tidal wave, sweeping over Sebastian before he could react. He felt it seep into his skin, into his veins, coursing through him. It burned with an intense, searing heat, but it was not just physical. It was something deeper, something that tore at the very fabric of his being. As the blood consumed him, Sebastian's vision blurred, and he fell to his knees. He felt his breath growing shallow, his heart slowing, as though it were being replaced by the darkness. And in the distance, he heard the faintest whisper of Althea's voice, the last of her soul calling out to him, "Now you are mine." Forever. The darkness grew thicker around Sebastian, and the world, once vivid and full of pain, faded into an endless expanse of cold. The blood that coursed through him was not his own, and yet it consumed him in a way that was far more intimate than any poison or curse ever could. He could feel it burrowing into his flesh, into his very soul, entwining itself with his thoughts, his essence, until he was no longer sure where he ended and it began. The blood, the curse, had woven itself into the fabric of his being. There was no escape, no salvation. He was her now, part of Althea's legacy. The land itself had claimed him, and its hunger would never be sated. Sebastian's eyes flickered open, but the world around him was no longer the crumbling ruins of the castle. It was something else, something older, a place of dark, swirling shadows, where no light could touch. He stood in the midst of a vast, barren landscape, where the sky above him was thick with roiling clouds that blocked out any trace of the sun. The air smelled of decay, of something ancient and forgotten. In the distance, he could see figures moving, shapes too indistinct to fully make out. Their presence felt like a deep ache, a gnawing hunger that gnawed at the edges of his mind. Was this the afterlife? Was this where souls went when they were consumed by the curse? But no, it wasn't the afterlife. It was the very essence of the curse itself. Sebastian had been drawn into the very core of the blood ritual. The land had pulled him here, where the power of Althea and the god Vargan lived on. This was a place outside of time and space, a realm between the living and the dead, where only the echoes of those who had been consumed by the curse remained. And yet, even here, Sebastian felt the faintest glimmer of something that seemed like hope. It was as if there were a way out, a way to undo the horror, but it was buried beneath layers of torment, wrapped in the very shadows that sought to claim him. "Is this your kingdom, then?" he muttered to himself, his voice sounding hollow in the vast emptiness. "A world of shadows and hunger?" "You are mistaken," came a voice soft, yet so powerful it shook the ground beneath his feet. Sebastian whirled around, eyes wide, heart racing. There, standing at the edge of the dark horizon, was her, Althea. But this was not the decaying apparition he had seen before. This was something else, something more primal. Her skin glowed with an eerie, spectral light, her eyes burning with an unnatural fire. "I was once a queen," she whispered, her voice carried by the winds that howled through the darkened world. "I once ruled over Althea with love and care. I once knew peace, but peace is a fleeting thing." Her words were heavy, like a memory of something long lost. But as she stepped closer, her form shifting in and out of focus, Sebastian realized that what he had witnessed was not the true Althea. No, this was a reflection of her, a part of her that had been twisted by the curse. The hunger that had driven her to seek immortality was not only what had consumed her body, but what had shattered her soul into something unrecognizable. I thought that by bathing in blood, by feeding on innocence, I would become eternal. She continued, her voice laced with sorrow. But immortality is not a gift. It is a curse. It is a hunger that can never be sated. Sebastian felt the blood within him stir at her words. He could feel the hunger and gnawing, aching emptiness that clawed at him from the inside. It was the same hunger that had driven her, the same hunger that had twisted her once beautiful kingdom into this cursed realm. You think you can escape it, Althea's voice echoed in the distance, but you cannot. You will never be free. This hunger will follow you forever. Sebastian's vision blurred again, and he staggered forward, clutching his chest as though the weight of the curse was physically crushing him. His body, his mind were no longer his own. It was as if the very blood that coursed through him was trying to drown him in its endless need for more. Althea's laughter echoed around him, the sound both maddening and sorrowful. You were a pawn in a game far larger than you could ever understand, she said, her words wrapping around him like chains. And now, you will be my successor. You will walk this world as I did. You will feed, and you will never stop. The ground beneath him seemed to shift. The sky above him darkened further, and the figures in the distance drew closer. Their faces were hidden in shadow, but their presence was unmistakable. Souls trapped in the curse, souls that had been consumed, just as he had been consumed. Sebastian's mind screamed, fighting against the weight of the curse. No, he would not fall to this. He could not become one of them. He could not become her. With a final burst of strength, he pushed himself forward, breaking free of the oppressive weight of the curse. The blood within him burned as though it were alive, tearing at his skin. But Sebastian's will was stronger now. He had seen the truth. He had felt the curse's grip, and now he understood the only way to truly defeat it. He could not destroy it. He could not erase it, but he could refuse it. He could starve the hunger. With a scream that echoed through the realm of shadows, Sebastian ripped the very blood from his veins, tearing it free from his body, rejecting the eternal thirst that had bound him. He collapsed to his knees, but as he did, he saw the figures, those souls who had been lost to the curse, begin to flicker and fade. The hunger they had carried for centuries began to die, and Althea, the twisted reflection of her, screamed, her form flickering with desperation as she reached out toward him. You cannot escape. You are me. You will be consumed. But Sebastian was no longer listening. The hunger faded from his chest, and the shadows began to recede, lifting from the land like a fading storm. Slowly, the darkness that had swallowed him began to break apart. He could feel the curse loosen its grip on the land, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sebastian saw a sliver of light. The figures that had haunted him, the trapped souls, slowly began to fade into the ether, and with their departure, the land began to heal. The cursed blood that had flowed through it for so long drained away, leaving a silence that was both heavy and peaceful. Sebastian stood, blooded but alive. The curse was not gone, not entirely, but its hold on him had been severed. He had broken free from the hunger. For the first time, he could breathe again. The land would heal slowly, painfully, but it would heal. And as the final vestiges of Althea's voice echoed into nothingness, Sebastian took one last look at the remnants of the cursed kingdom. There was no true victory here. The cost had been far too high, but the curse had ended. The land, for the first time in centuries, was free, and though the hunger would always linger, it would never claim him again. As the echoes of Althea's final scream faded, a deep silence settled over the land. The remnants of the cursed kingdom of Althea, once a thriving realm, now reduced to a haunted wasteland, lay still beneath the pale glow of the rising moon. The wind no longer whispered with the same ominous chill, but instead carried a faint warmth, as though the earth itself were breathing once again. Sebastian stood alone amidst the ruins. His body, though battered and broken, still pulsed with the lingering effects of the blood, but the weight that had threatened to crush his soul was gone. The hunger, the desperate need to feed Althea's curse had released its grip on him, but not without leaving behind a lingering echo of its touch. He knew, though, that this was not the end, not the true end. The land would need time to recover, and so would he. The curse might have been severed, but the shadow of its legacy would remain in the bones of Althea, in the blood-stained earth. It had taken so many lives, both from the land and from himself. What had been done could never truly be undone. But that was the nature of blood. It carried with it a story, a legacy that could never be erased. Sebastian knew this better than anyone. He had become a part of that legacy now. The stars in the sky seemed to shine a little brighter, and yet there was a darkness in their light, an uncertainty that lingered. Althea had been freed, yes, but at what cost? The curse had been more than just a ritual of immortality. It was a reflection of the land itself, a twisting of power, a hunger for control, and though the blood was no longer flowing, its stain would linger forever, etched into the very fabric of time. Sebastian's thoughts turned back to the journal he had found in the heart of the castle, Althea's own words. She had written of the hunger, of the eternal cycle that bound her to the earth, and of the cost of immortality. What had begun as a lust for power, a desire to escape the ravages of time, had transformed her into something unrecognizable, something dark and twisted. And now he understood that same hunger had taken root in him. Though he had severed its influence, a part of him still felt its pull and echo, a whisper at the edge of his mind. The hunger was not something that could be easily eradicated. It was a seed planted deep within his soul, and as much as he fought against it, there would always be a part of him that knew the taste of blood, knew the insatiable yearning that came with it. As the days passed and the land slowly began to heal, Sebastian ventured beyond the ruins, carrying the weight of his experience with him. The world beyond Althea had moved on, but the shadow of the Witch Queen's reign hung heavy in the air, a reminder that no victory came without sacrifice. His heart was heavier than it had ever been, burdened by the knowledge that though the curse had been broken for now, its roots run deep. And so he walked away from the ruins, away from the memories of the land that had consumed him, and yet, somehow, still holding its mark. His journey was not one of redemption, for there could be no redemption from such a legacy. It was a journey of survival, of learning to live with the blood that had been spilled, of carrying the curse with him without letting it consume him entirely. But as he walked through the forests and hills, past villages that had once known the terror of the Witch Queen's rule, he began to hear something else, something that chilled him to his core. Whispers of strange happenings in far-off lands, rumors of a figure that moved in shadows, of a woman who never aged, who always appeared when she was needed most. A queen, they said, a queen who bathed in the blood of virgins. Sebastian's blood ran cold as he realized what the whispers meant. The cycle, it seemed, had never truly been broken. Perhaps Althea's curse could never be fully erased. The blood that had driven her madness had taken root in the very fabric of the world, and as long as it existed, it would haunt the land. He could feel it then, deep in his chest, a pull, a connection. The hunger, the blood, a part of it still lived in him, a part that could never be separated from the legacy he had inherited. Was he doomed, then, to wander this world forever? carrying the curse of the Witch Queen. Would the blood of virgins always be required to sate the hunger that had first taken root in Althea's soul? In the distance, the moon rose high above the trees, casting a pale light on the land, and in the depths of his heart, Sebastian knew the answer. The legacy of the Witch Queen, of her thirst for immortality, could never truly be destroyed. It was a part of the world now woven into the very bones of the earth, inextricably linked to the blood that had been spilled. And perhaps the worst part of it all was that it would always call to him. It would never let him forget. The legacy of the Witch Queen was not something that could be erased. It would live on in whispers, in shadows, in the land itself. It would live on in Sebastian too, and in the end, he would never escape its hunger. For in the end, the curse of immortality was not just a hunger for blood, it was a hunger for more. A hunger that could never truly be satisfied. And that hunger would follow him until the end of time.